The small town of Fairhaven had never seen anything like it. One moment, the grocery store was just another place struggling to stay afloat in tough economic times, and the next, a billionaire had walked in and bought everything on the shelves. It all started on a cold December morning when Robert Langford, a self-made billionaire known for his investments in technology, arrived in Fairhaven. Unlike other billionaires who spent their holidays in lavish resorts, Robert had a different idea in mind. He wanted to give back, but not with just a check. He wanted to see the impact firsthand. Dressed in a simple wool coat, he stepped into Miller's Market, a small, family-owned grocery store that had been serving the community for decades. The owner, Mr. Miller, a gray-haired man in his 70s, was behind the counter, looking exhausted. The store was nearly empty, not of people, but of stocked shelves. Inflation had made it difficult for families to afford even the basics, and Mr. Miller's heart broke every time he saw someone put back a carton of milk or a loaf of bread because they couldn't afford it. Robert watched as a young mother hesitated at the dairy section, counting the few crumpled bills in her hand. Her little boy tugged at her coat, pointing at a box of cereal. She gave him a sad smile and shook her head, leading him away. Robert felt a lump rise in his throat. Without hesitation, he walked up to Mr. Miller. "I want to buy everything in your store," he said simply. The old man blinked. "Excuse me? I'll pay for everything, every can, every bottle, every loaf of bread, and then we'll give it all away for free." Mr. Miller's eyes widened, and for a moment he thought the man was joking. But when Robert pulled out his checkbook, his hands trembled. "Are you serious, sir?" Robert nodded. "Yes, and I want you to keep running the store. This isn't just about today." The news spread like wildfire. Customers who had just come in to pick up a few items stood frozen in shock as the realization sank in. Everything in the store was now theirs to take. The young mother who had just walked away from the dairy aisle gasped when she heard the announcement. A teenager recording the moment on his phone whispered, "This can't be real." But it was real. Robert turned to the customers and said with a warm smile, "Go ahead, fill your carts, whatever you need, take it. And if you know someone who's struggling, take some for them too." Tears welled up in Mr. Miller's eyes. He had owned this store for years, and never in his life had he seen anything like this. The first few moments were silent, as if people were afraid to believe it. But then, slowly, carts started moving. A woman in her 60s wiped her eyes and picked up a carton of eggs. A father, who had been debating whether to get milk or baby formula, grabbed both. A little girl, clutching her grandmother's hand, whispered, "Grandma, can we really get anything?" "Yes, sweetheart," the old woman choked out. "Anything." Robert watched as the store transformed before his eyes. Not into a place of commerce, but a place of kindness. The weight of struggle lifted, if only for a while, and he saw the difference a simple act of generosity could make. But he wasn't done yet. As the shelves emptied and the people of Fairhaven left with bags full of groceries and hearts full of gratitude, Robert turned to Mr. Miller and said, "Now, let's talk about the future." Mr. Miller still couldn't believe what had just happened. His store, which had struggled for months to stay in business, had just experienced the most incredible day in its history. The sight of neighbors, walking out with food they desperately needed warmed his heart in a way he hadn't felt in years. But what truly stunned him was Robert Langford's last words. "Now, let's talk about the future." The old grocer cleared his throat, trying to regain his composure. "Son, I don't know what to say. You've done more for this town in a single day than I've done in a lifetime." Robert shook his head. "You've been feeding people for years, Mr. Miller. I just gave you a little boost." He gestured toward the back of the store where a worn wooden office door stood. "May we sit for a moment?" Still dazed, Mr. Miller led him inside. The office was small and cluttered with paperwork, receipts, and an old ledger book Mr. Miller still used despite having a computer. He sat down behind his desk, folding his wrinkled hands. Robert leaned forward. "I don't want this to be a one-time thing. People need food every day, not just today. What if we turn this place into something bigger?" Mr. Miller frowned. "Bigger? I want to invest in this store," Robert explained. "Not just to keep it running, but to transform it into something sustainable. Imagine a community grocery store where people can shop without fear of prices they can't afford." Mr. Miller blinked. "You mean a charity?" "Not exactly," Robert replied. "More like a place where people pay what they can. Some will pay full price, some will pay less, and some, like that mother I saw today, will pay nothing when they need to." The old man rubbed his chin. "I don't know, son. I've been doing this a long time, and business doesn't work that way. I barely break even as it is." "That's where I come in," Robert said. "I'll cover the difference. I'll make sure you never have to worry about bills, suppliers, or running out of food. Your job will be to keep the store running and treat everyone with dignity." Mr. Miller exhaled slowly. "That sounds impossible." "It's not," Robert said with confidence. "I've seen models like this work before. When people know they have support, they don't take advantage. They give back in whatever way they can. Maybe some people can't pay for food, but they can help stock shelves. Maybe others can donate a little extra when times are good. It becomes a cycle of kindness." The old man was quiet for a long moment. The weight of years running this store, of struggling to make ends meet, of watching families suffer. He had learned to accept it as just the way things were. But now, here was this man, this stranger, offering a new way. Mr. Miller finally spoke, his voice shaky. "And you'd really do this? Not just today, but long term?" Robert nodded. "Yes, but I won't force you into anything. This is your store, your town. If you don't want this, I'll respect that." The old man swallowed hard. Then slowly, he reached out his hand. "If this means no family in Fairhaven has to go hungry again, then let's do it." Robert grinned and shook his hand firmly. "Then we have a deal." Neither of them knew it yet, but this moment would change Fairhaven forever. Word spread fast. By the next morning, the entire town of Fairhaven was buzzing with excitement. A billionaire was investing in their small grocery store, not to turn it into another corporate chain, but to make sure no one in the town went hungry again. Neighbors gathered outside Miller's Market, whispering in disbelief. Some still thought it was too good to be true, while others were already coming up with ways to help. Inside the store, Mr. Miller stood beside Robert Langford, staring at the old shelves that had been emptied the day before. "Well," the grocer sighed, "we gave away all the food. What now?" Robert smiled. "Now we restock, better than ever." Within hours, trucks began arriving, carrying crates of fresh produce, dairy, canned goods, and even things the store had never stocked before, like organic fruits and international ingredients. Mr. Miller's eyes widened as he saw workers unloading sacks of flour, bins of apples, and crates of eggs. "I haven't seen the store this full in years," he murmured, overwhelmed. As the shelves filled up, so did the store. Families walked in hesitantly, unsure of how it all worked now. Would they have to prove they were struggling? Was there some catch? Robert, standing near the entrance, greeted them personally. "Welcome back," he said with a warm smile. "Everything works the same as before, except now you pay what you can. If today's a tough day, take what you need. If you're able to give a little extra, it helps keep the shelves full for everyone." At first, people hesitated. A single mother named Lisa walked in, her 2 kids clinging to her coat. She picked up a few groceries, constantly glancing at the price tags. At checkout, when she reached for her wallet, Mr. Miller gently waved her off. "Don't worry about it today, sweetheart," he said with a smile. Lisa's eyes filled with tears. "But I don't want to take advantage." "You're not," Robert assured her. "Just do what you can when you can, that's all we ask." She hesitated for only a second longer before hugging the bag of groceries to her chest and whispering, "Thank you." Others soon followed. Some paid full price, others left a little extra, and a few, like Lisa, left with bags of food and tearful gratitude. Later that evening, an elderly man named George, a retired carpenter, walked into the store. He didn't need groceries, he had enough for now, but he had heard what was happening and wanted to help. "I don't have much money," he admitted, rubbing his calloused hands together, "but I can fix those wobbly shelves in aisle 3. Mr. Miller chuckled. "You know, I've been meaning to get to that." "Consider it my way of paying," George said with a grin. That night, long after the last customer left, Robert and Mr. Miller sat by the register, watching as volunteers wiped down the counters and stocked the remaining shelves. "This isn't just a store anymore," Mr. Miller finally said. "It's something bigger." Robert nodded. "It's a community." And for the first time in a long time, Fairhaven felt like a town where no one was left behind. The transformation of Miller's Market was more than just a business change. It was a shift in the heart of Fairhaven itself. Over the next few weeks, something remarkable happened. The store, once struggling to stay afloat, had become the beating heart of the town. People didn't just come to buy groceries anymore. They came to give, to help, and to be part of something bigger than themselves. One morning, as Mr. Miller unlocked the front doors, he was surprised to see a line of people waiting outside. But they weren't there just to shop. Some held bags of fresh vegetables from their own gardens. Others carried home-baked goods or baskets of eggs from backyard hens. A local farmer, Mr. Jenkins, stepped forward, tipping his old straw hat. "Figured if you're feeding the town, we ought to help," he said. "Brought some extra potatoes and carrots from this year's harvest." Mr. Miller's throat tightened. He had spent decades in this town, watching people struggle in silence. Now, they were coming together in a way he had never seen before. Robert arrived soon after, smiling as he took in the sight of people bringing what they could. "Looks like we've started something special," he said. A young woman named Maria, who had once skipped meals just to make sure her younger siblings ate, stepped forward. "I don't have money," she admitted, "but I'm great at organizing. Maybe I could help keep the shelves stocked." "Absolutely," Robert said. One by one, more people came forward. Some donated their time, others their skills. An out-of-work chef offered to cook meals for anyone who needed a hot dinner. A retired teacher set up a small corner to help kids with their homework while their parents shopped. But the most touching moment came when Lisa, the single mother who had once hesitated to accept free groceries, returned a week later. She wasn't empty-handed. She carried a small tin of coins, savings she had scraped together from odd jobs. "It's not much," she said softly, placing it on the counter, "but I wanted to give back." Mr. Miller covered her hand with his own, his voice thick with emotion. "It's more than enough." As the days passed, Robert saw his vision coming to life. This wasn't just a store. It had become a movement. It had started with one act of generosity, but now it was growing into something much bigger. One evening, as Robert and Mr. Miller sat outside the store, watching families leave with full bags and full hearts, Mr. Miller let out a deep sigh. "I've run this store for 40 years, he said. "I thought I'd seen it all, but I've never seen anything like this." Robert smiled, looking out at the town that had embraced his idea so fully. "Kindness is contagious," he said. "Sometimes people just need someone to start it." And that was exactly what had happened in Fairhaven. Winter settled over Fairhaven, bringing crisp air and frosty mornings. Despite the cold, Miller's Market remained warm, not just from the heat of the store, but from the spirit that had taken root within its walls. Every morning, Mr. Miller arrived to find something new. Sometimes it was a basket of fresh eggs left by a farmer. Sometimes it was a handwritten note from a grateful family pinned to the bulletin board by the entrance. The town had truly embraced this new way of giving and receiving, and every day the store felt less like a business and more like a home. One afternoon, Robert stood by the front counter watching the flow of people. There was laughter, conversation, life. It wasn't just about food anymore, it was about connection. People lingered, checking in on one another. Strangers had become friends. That's when he noticed a boy, no older than 10, standing near the bread section. He clutched a crumpled dollar bill in his small fist, staring at the loaves as if trying to make an impossible decision. Robert walked over and crouched down. "Hey there," he said gently. "What's your name?" The boy hesitated. "Ethan." "Nice to meet you, Ethan. Need some help?" Ethan bit his lip and nodded. "I want to buy bread for my mom. She's sick, but I don't think I have enough." Robert's heart ached. He glanced down at the dollar in Ethan's hand, then back at the shelves lined with bread. With a warm smile, he grabbed a loaf and handed it to the boy. "You don't need to worry about the money, Ethan," he said. "Take this home to your mom." Ethan's eyes widened. "Really? Really?" The boy clutched the bread to his chest, his face a mix of relief and gratitude. Then, to Robert's surprise, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small round stone. It was smooth, polished from being carried around, with a little painted heart on one side. "This is my lucky rock," Ethan said. "I want you to have it." Robert hesitated, touched beyond words. He knelt down and accepted the rock carefully. "Thank you, Ethan. This means a lot." The boy nodded and ran out the door, disappearing into the cold afternoon. Robert stared at the little rock in his palm, feeling something deep inside him shift. It wasn't just about money or food or even generosity. It was about the kind of kindness that left a lasting mark. That evening, as Robert and Mr. Miller closed up the store, Robert pulled the rock from his pocket and showed it to the old man. "A kid gave me this today," he said. Mr. Miller peered at it and smiled. "Looks like you're getting paid in ways you never expected." Robert chuckled. "Yeah, and you know what? I think this is worth more than anything else I've earned." And in that moment he knew. Miller's Market wasn't just changing the town. It was changing him too. As the weeks passed, Miller's Market continued to thrive in ways no one had imagined. What had started as a simple act of generosity had turned into a movement, one that was strengthening Fairhaven in ways Robert had never expected. People no longer came just for food. They came to help, to give, to share. A small community bulletin board had been set up near the entrance, filled with handwritten notes offering everything from free babysitting to home repairs. A group of local teenagers even started a delivery service, bringing groceries to elderly residents who couldn't make the trip themselves. But one evening, as Robert sat at the counter sipping a cup of coffee, Mr. Miller approached with a serious look on his face. "We have a problem," the old grocer said. Robert set down his cup. "What's wrong?" Mr. Miller sighed. "Word is spreading beyond Fairhaven. We've got people coming in from neighboring towns now. Some folks are genuinely in need, but others—" He hesitated. "Others are taking advantage. I caught a man filling his trunk with groceries this morning. When I asked if he needed help, he just laughed and sped off." Robert's jaw tightened. He had expected something like this eventually, but it still stung. He didn't want to believe that anyone would exploit an act of kindness, but the reality was, not everyone had the same heart. "I don't want to turn people away," Mr. Miller continued, "but if this keeps up, we'll run out of food for our own community." Robert nodded slowly. "I hear you. We need to find a balance." The two men sat in silence for a moment, thinking. Then Robert spoke. "We're not shutting anyone out, but we need a system. What if we create a membership for Fairhaven residents? Something simple, maybe just a card they show when they come in. That way, we can prioritize the people who truly need it. Mr. Miller considered it. And for outsiders. We set limits, we'll still help, but they won't be able to take everything off the shelves. Maybe we encourage neighboring towns to start something similar. Instead of just taking, they can create their own version of what we're doing here. The old man nodded slowly. I like that idea. The very next day, they put the plan into action. Regular Fairhaven residents received small cards. Nothing fancy, just a way to identify those who were part of the town. Visitors from outside were still welcome, but with reasonable limits. And for those truly in need, Robert offered to help them set up similar community markets in their own towns. At first, there was resistance. A few people grumbled. Some even accused them of being unfair. But as the days passed, people began to understand. This wasn't about shutting others out. It was about making sure the kindness kept going. One evening, as Robert walked through the aisles, he noticed Lisa, the single mother who had once hesitated to take free groceries, helping a newcomer navigate the system. It's not just about free food, she was explaining. It's about community. You take when you need, and you give when you can. That's how this place works. Robert smiled to himself. This idea, this movement, it was no longer just his. It belonged to Fairhaven now. Winter gave way to spring, and with it, Miller's Market became more than just a store. It became a symbol of hope. The system Robert and Mr. Miller had put in place was working. Fairhaven residents never had to worry about going hungry, and thanks to Robert's encouragement, other towns had started their own versions of community-driven stores. What began as one billionaire's act of kindness had sparked a movement far beyond what he had imagined. One evening, Robert stood outside the store, watching as families left with their groceries. Some had paid full price, others had paid what they could, and a few had taken what they needed for free. No shame, no judgment, just people looking out for one another. Mr. Miller joined him, leaning against the doorframe. "I've seen a lot in my years," he said, "but nothing like this. I never thought I'd see a day where people would come together like this, not just for themselves, but for each other."